The first time I met Richard, he was crying in the produce aisle of a grocery store. Not sobbing, nothing theatrical like that. Just standing there, shoulders slightly hunched, staring at a display of oranges with tears sliding down his face like he was watching something die. I should have kept walking. I was 42 years old, widowed for 18 months, and I had learned that grief in public places was usually a performance. But there was something about the way he stood. Too still, too quiet. The stillness of a man who had forgotten other people could see him. That made me stop. "Sir?" I said. "Are you okay?" He looked at me. His eyes were gray-green, the color of lake water on an overcast day, and they held no calculation, no opening gambit. Just embarrassment, raw and immediate. The embarrassment of a man caught being human. "Oranges," he said. His voice was soft, rough, the voice of someone who didn't use it much. "My wife, she loved oranges. She would peel them in bed, in the dark, and the smell would wake me up. I used to complain." He laughed, a broken sound. "God, I used to complain about the smell of oranges, and now I stand here and I can't buy one because I know I'll smell it and I'll—" He stopped. He wiped his face with his sleeve, a gesture so unguarded it made my chest ache. "I'm sorry. You didn't need to see that." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. I knew that ache. I knew the way grief ambushed you in ordinary places. The cereal aisle, the gas station, the spot on the couch where your husband used to sit. I knew the oranges. "I'm Margaret," I said. "Margaret Cole. Richard Vance." He held out his hand. It was warm, slightly calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his hands despite the suit he wore. "I should go. My son is waiting in the car. He's patient, but I shouldn't keep him." "How old is your son?" 17, Ethan." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Pride, maybe, or pain, or the complicated alloy of both that I recognized from my own reflection. "He's been my rock. Since his mother. Since Eleanor passed. 2 years now. Cancer." "I'm sorry," I said. "My husband passed too. Heart attack. 18 months ago." The silence between us was different then. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of survivors. People who had learned that the world kept turning whether you were ready or not, who had learned to fake normalcy until it became something close to real. Richard looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into the orange display. He picked one, small, slightly bruised, imperfect, and he held it out. "For your husband," he said. "Whoever he was, whatever he loved. Buy it for him. Even if you throw it away later. Buy it and remember that you loved him enough to stand in a grocery store and talk to a stranger." I took the orange. It was cold, heavy, real in my palm. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. He turned and walked away, and I watched him go. Tall, thin, moving with the careful precision of a man who had learned that the ground could give way beneath his feet at any moment. I didn't know I would marry him. I didn't know I would love him, or think I loved him, or that the love would curdle into something harder and sharper than I had ever imagined. I didn't know that the orange would sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days, rotting slowly, while I planned my wedding to a man who was planning to destroy me. I just knew that for the first time in 18 months, I had felt something other than numb. We met again 2 weeks later, at a grief support group, the kind of thing I had sworn I would never attend, the kind of thing my sister Diane kept pushing, kept insisting, kept saying, "Margaret, you can't isolate yourself forever." I had gone to shut her up. I had stayed because Richard was there. He sat across the circle from me, same gray-green eyes, same careful stillness. When it was his turn to speak, he talked about Eleanor. Not the performance grief that some people brought. The detailed medical histories, the martyred exhaustion, the subtle competition over who had suffered more. He talked about her laugh, the way she hummed off key while cooking, the way she had hidden his keys every April Fool's Day, Without fail, for 23 years. She wasn't perfect, he said. She was terrible with money. She cried at commercials. She once got us lost on a road trip and refused to ask for directions for 6 hours because she was sure it was this way. He smiled, that small, broken smile. But she was mine, and I was hers. And now I'm learning to be without her. Slowly, badly, but learning. The group leader nodded, made some therapeutic noise, moved on. But Richard's eyes found mine across the circle, and something passed between us. Recognition. The acknowledgement that we were both faking it, both performing our grief for an audience, both desperate for someone who understood that the performance was necessary, but never sufficient. After the meeting, he waited for me by the door. "Margaret," he said, "I wasn't sure you'd be here. I wasn't sure I'd come back. My son, Ethan, he's driving me home, but I wondered if—" He paused, his hands finding his pockets, the gesture of a man unaccustomed to asking for things. "Would you have coffee? There's a place around the corner. I could call Ethan, tell him to pick me up later, if you want. If you're not. If this isn't—" "I'd like that," I said. The coffee shop was small, warm, the kind of place that stayed in business through stubbornness rather than profit. Richard bought my coffee without asking what I wanted. Black, 2 sugars, the way I had mentioned in the group, in passing, 3 weeks ago. He remembered. That should have been my first warning, but I was lonely, and he was kind, and the orange was still rotting on my counter at home. "Ethan is applying to colleges," Richard said, stirring his own coffee. Milk, no sugar, the details accumulating like evidence in a case I didn't know I was building. "He wants to study business, finance. He's always been good with numbers. Better than me, certainly. You must be proud." I am, and terrified. College is expensive. Even with Eleanor's life insurance, even with what I've saved. He shook his head. "I'm an accountant, Margaret. A small-town accountant with small-town clients. I do taxes for retirees and bookkeeping for the hardware store. I make enough. But college? 4 years, plus room and board, plus—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. You don't need my financial anxiety." "It's okay," I said. "I understand anxiety. I understand worrying about money you don't have." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not calculation, or not calculation I recognized. Interest. The slow, careful interest of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be interested in someone who wasn't a memory. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Your husband, what was his name?" "David." "David. Did he leave you? I mean, financially. Are you okay? After?" It was a rude question, or should have been, but grief had stripped away my capacity for polite offense, and something in Richard's voice, not greed, not probing, just concern, the rough concern of someone who had learned that money could be as devastating a loss as love, made me answer honestly. "He left me comfortable," I said. "Not rich, but comfortable. A house, some investments. Enough that I don't have to work, though I do, part-time at the library. Enough that I'm not worried about the future. Not financially, anyway." Richard nodded slowly. "That's good. I'm glad. You deserve that, Margaret. After what you've been through, you deserve some peace." He reached across the table. He took my hand, gently, tentatively, the touch of a man who expected to be pulled away. I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, slightly trembling, and they fit around mine like they had been designed for that purpose. "I know it's fast," he said. "I know we're both carrying things. But would you have dinner with me? Proper dinner. Not coffee. I could cook. Ethan is at a friend's on Saturday. It would just be us. And I promise I'm not asking for anything except your company." I looked at him. The gray-green eyes, the thin shoulders, the frayed collar of his shirt that I hadn't noticed in the grocery store but saw now, The small signs of a life lived carefully, frugally, without excess. Saturday, I said. What time? Ethan Vance was beautiful. Not handsome, beautiful, the way some young men are, with the kind of face that made you understand why artists painted angels as androgynous. Blonde where his father was dark, blue-eyed where his father was gray-green, tall and broad-shouldered where his father was thin. He was the photograph negative of Richard, and he moved through the world with a confidence that bordered on performance. Margaret, he said, when Richard introduced us. His smile was perfect, white, practiced. Dad has talked about nothing but you for weeks. I'm so glad to finally meet you. He took my hand. His grip was firm, dry, the grip of a young man who had learned early that first impressions were currency. Ethan has been helping me plan, Richard said, slightly embarrassed. The dinner, I mean. He insisted on setting the table. He said, "What did you say, Ethan?" "I said you deserve something nice," Ethan said. His eyes didn't leave mine. "Dad hasn't been happy in a long time, Margaret. If you can change that, even a little, I owe you everything." The dinner was simple. Roast chicken, potatoes, a salad that Ethan had prepared with the precision of someone who had watched cooking shows for technique. We talked about books. Ethan was reading The Great Gatsby for school, he said, and found Gatsby tragically naive, but admirably committed. We talked about the town, the library, the way the winters seemed longer every year. We talked about everything except the things that mattered. After dinner, Ethan cleared the table while Richard and I sat on the porch. The night was cool, September bleeding into October, and the stars were sharp and bright above us. "Ethan likes you," Richard said. "He's charming." "He is. Sometimes I worry, he's too charming. Too good at reading people, giving them what they want. His mother was the same way." Richard paused. She could walk into a room and know exactly who needed a compliment, who needed space, who needed to feel like the smartest person there. It was a gift. But gifts can be used, you know, for good or otherwise. I thought of Ethan's perfect smile, his steady gaze, the way he had said, "I owe you everything," like he was reciting a line he had rehearsed. But I pushed the thought away. I was being cynical. I was being damaged. Not everyone was hiding something. "Richard," I said, "can I ask you something? Anything." "Why me? I'm 42. I'm widowed. I'm not young or beautiful or particularly interesting. I work part-time at a library and I spend my evenings reading mysteries and talking to my sister on the phone. Why do you want this? Want me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to me, and his gray-green eyes held something I couldn't name. "Because you didn't perform," he said. "In the grocery store. You saw me crying over oranges, and you didn't try to fix me. You didn't tell me it would get better. You didn't share your own tragedy to make me feel less alone. You just stood there. And that was enough. That was more than enough." He took my hand. His fingers were warm, steady now, the trembling gone. "I don't need you to be young or beautiful or interesting, Margaret. I need you to be real. And you are. God help me, you are the most real thing I've touched in 2 years." I kissed him. It was not a passionate kiss. It was careful, tentative, the kiss of two people who had forgotten how to be intimate without grief as the third participant. But it was real. It was enough. I didn't see Ethan watching from the kitchen window. I didn't see the way his perfect smile had vanished, replaced by something harder, colder, more patient than any 17-year-old should be capable of. I just felt safe. And that was my first mistake. We married 4 months later. Small ceremony. Just Diane, a few friends from the library, Ethan's college counselor who had become a family friend. No honeymoon. Richard couldn't afford the time off work, he said, and I didn't push. I understood the anxiety of small businesses, of clients who needed you, of the precarious balance that kept a life from tipping into chaos. The wedding was at the courthouse. I wore a cream dress that Diane had helped me pick, simple and elegant, the kind of dress that said, "I'm starting over," without screaming it. Richard wore a suit that fit him well, new, I noticed, or at least newer than anything I'd seen him in. Ethan was his best man, handsome in navy blue, his smile camera-ready. "You look beautiful, Margaret," Ethan said, when Richard went to sign the license. He stood too close, his voice low, intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. "Dad is lucky. We're both lucky." "Thank you, Ethan. I mean it." His blue eyes held mine. "You've made him happy. Happier than I've seen him since Mom died. I don't know how to repay you for that." "You don't need to repay me. I love your father. That's enough." "Is it?" Ethan tilted his head, a gesture that reminded me of a bird studying something it intended to eat. "Love is complicated, isn't it? People think it's simple, but it's not. It's transactions. Give and take. You give Dad happiness, he gives you, what? Companionship? Security? A family?" "Ethan, I'm sorry." The smile returned, instant and perfect. "That was inappropriate. I'm protective of him. Of us. Our family. I don't want anyone to get hurt." He squeezed my hand. His grip was firm, dry, the same grip as the first time we'd met. But something had changed. I felt it in the pressure of his fingers, the slight delay before he let go. He knows, I thought. The thought came from nowhere, sharp and cold as a blade. He knows about the money. But that was impossible. No one knew about the money. Not Diane, not my lawyer, not the trustee who managed the account. David had made sure of that before he died. The secret trust, the $53 million, the ironclad protections that kept it invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. I had told Richard I was comfortable. I had never said rich. I had never said millionaire. I had never said that my late husband had been a venture capitalist who had sold his company for 9 figures, who had hidden the majority of his wealth in structures so complex that even the IRS struggled to map them. No one knew. No one could know. But as Ethan walked away, his shoulders straight, his smile fixed, I felt the first cold thread of doubt wind through my chest. I pushed it down. I was being paranoid. I was letting David's obsession with secrecy infect my new marriage. Richard loved me. Ethan was just a protective son. Everything was fine. Everything was fine. The first 2 days of marriage were ordinary. Richard went to work. The office? He called it. Same as always. The small accounting firm on Main Street that served the town's retirees and hardware stores. I stayed home, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, learning the rhythms of a house that wasn't mine, but was becoming mine. Ethan was at school during the days, but he came home for dinner each night. He was polite, helpful, almost too perfect, setting the table without being asked, asking about my day with genuine-sounding interest, clearing dishes before I could stand. "You're going to spoil me," I said, the second night, as he loaded the dishwasher with mechanical precision. "Someone should," Ethan said. He didn't look at me. "Dad works so hard. He deserves to come home to a peaceful house, a happy house. That's all I want for him. For us." "You're a good son." "I try." He closed the dishwasher. He turned to me, and for a moment his perfect mask slipped. I saw something underneath. Exhaustion, maybe, or calculation, or the simple desperation of a young man who had been playing a role for so long he had forgotten who he really was. "Margaret," he said, "can I ask you something? Personal?" "Of course." "Your first husband, David, he was successful, right? I mean, before he died. He must have been, to leave you comfortable." The word hung in the air. Comfortable. The word I had used. Carefully. Deliberately. The word that meant nothing and everything. "He did well," I said carefully. "But he worked hard for it. Long hours. A lot of stress. The money wasn't... It wasn't easy money, Ethan. It cost him." Everything costs something, Ethan said. His voice was soft, almost dreamy. The question is whether you're willing to pay, whether the people around you are willing to pay. Ethan, Dad is home, he said, straightening, the mask snapping back into place. I'll get his coat. I stood in the kitchen, the dishwasher humming, and I watched Ethan greet his father with a hug that looked genuine, warm, the hug of a son who loved his father. Richard beamed, tired but happy, and I pushed the conversation away, buried it with all the other doubts that had no place in my new life. But that night, after Richard fell asleep, quickly, heavily, the sleep of a man who worked hard and worried constantly, I went to my dresser. I opened the hidden compartment that David had installed, the compartment that held the trust documents, the account statements, the proof of everything I had promised to keep secret. I took out the small device that David had given me 6 months before he died, a voice recorder disguised as a pen with enough memory for 40 hours of audio. I had never used it. I had thought I would never need to. I turned it on. I checked the battery. I put it in my purse and I went back to bed, and I lay beside my sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling until dawn. I didn't know why I did it. I told myself it was habit, David's paranoia, inherited like a reflex. I told myself I was being silly, that Richard was good, that Ethan was just a teenager with boundary issues. But something in me, something that had survived Daniel, survived David's long illness, survived every loss that had taught me to build walls, something in me knew. The vultures were circling, and this time, I was going to be ready. On the third day, they came. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard the car. Not Richard's sedan. Something heavier, more expensive. The purr of money. I looked out the window. A black Lincoln, polished to a mirror shine, parked in the driveway beside Richard's battered Toyota. 2 men got out. Richard, same suit, same tired eyes, but moving differently now, faster, with purpose. And a stranger, older, silver-haired, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed lawyer. Ethan was already inside. I hadn't heard him come in. He stood in the hallway watching me, his perfect smile in place but his eyes cold, flat, the eyes of a stranger. "Margaret," he said, "we need to talk. All of us." I set down my coffee cup. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt something settle inside me, that diamond hardness, that terrible clarity I had learned to recognize as survival. "Of course," I said. "Shall we sit in the living room?" Richard wouldn't look at me. He sat on the couch, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor like a child waiting to be punished. The lawyer sat beside him, briefcase open, papers arranged with the precision of a man who had done this many times before. Ethan stood. He didn't sit. He leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, and he looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been triumph. "Margaret," the lawyer said. His voice was dry, professional, the voice of a man who billed by the hour and didn't waste time on emotion. "I'm Arthur Poole. I represent the Vance family. I'm here today because there are concerns, serious concerns, about your mental and emotional fitness to manage your late husband's estate." "My fitness," I repeated. "Yes." Poole shuffled papers. "We've received information from reliable sources, I assure you, that you have been experiencing severe depression, paranoia, and delusional thinking since David Cole's death. That you have isolated yourself from family and friends, made erratic financial decisions, and exhibited behavior consistent with early-onset dementia." He paused, letting the words land. I looked at Richard. He was still staring at the floor. "Furthermore," Poole continued, "there are concerns about your capacity to enter into a valid marriage, that you may have been, forgive the bluntness, taken advantage of by parties interested in your wealth. That this marriage in particular may have been entered into under duress or without full understanding of its implications." "Parties interested in my wealth?" I said slowly. "You mean Richard? My husband?" I mean, Poole said, that the Vance family has your best interests at heart. Richard and Ethan have come to me out of concern, not malice. They want to help you, Margaret. They want to protect you. Protect me from what? From yourself. Ethan spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, gentle, the voice of a son speaking to a mother he loved. Margaret, we know about the money, the $53 million. We know David left it in some complicated trust, and we know you're the only one who can access it. And we know, Dad and I, that you've been making strange decisions. The marriage, so fast, the isolation, the way you hide things, lock things away, act like everyone's out to get you. He stepped closer. His perfect smile was sad now, concerned. The smile of a young man who had learned to perform empathy as well as he performed everything else. We're not trying to hurt you, he said. We're trying to help. The lawyer can set up a guardianship. Temporary. Just until you're better. Dad will manage the money. He'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll have everything you need. You just won't have to worry about the decisions anymore. The stress. The paranoia. He reached out. He took my hand. The same grip. Firm and dry. But now I felt the intention behind it. The ownership. Let us help you, Mom, he said. Let us be your family. For real. I looked at Richard. He finally looked up, and his gray-green eyes were wet, red-rimmed, the eyes of a man who had cried before he arrived. Margaret, he whispered. I love you. I do. But you're not well. The things you've said, the way you hide things, the way you look at us sometimes like we're enemies. I can't watch you destroy yourself. Please. Let us help. I sat very still. I looked at the three of them. The husband who loved me, the son who called me Mom, the lawyer who billed by the hour. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not fear. Not anger. Relief. Because the waiting was over. The suspicion, the doubt, the small cold voice that had whispered they know, it was all true. And now I didn't have to pretend anymore. I stood up. I walked to my purse sitting on the side table. I opened it. I took out the pen, the voice recorder, David's gift, the paranoia that had become prophecy. I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. From 3 weeks ago, from the night before the wedding, from the conversation I had recorded through the wall while Richard slept and his son thought he was alone. She has no idea, Dad. She thinks we're broke. She thinks you're some sad accountant with a dead wife and a kid who needs college money. She's lonely, Ethan. Vulnerable. She wants to believe someone loves her for her, not for the money. And you do? Love her? A pause. Then Richard's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. I love what she can give us. 53 million, Ethan. Think about that. College, grad school, a house, investments. We'll never have to work again. We just have to be patient. Play the long game. And if she finds out? She won't. She's too desperate to be loved. Too grateful that someone wants her. By the time she suspects anything, we'll have the guardianship. Poole has the paperwork ready. 3 days after the wedding. That's all we need. 3 days to establish concern, to document instability, to make her look crazy. And if she fights? She won't. She has no one, Ethan. No family, no friends, no one who will believe her over us. She's alone. She's been alone her whole life. That's why she's perfect. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than the silence of the grocery store, deeper than the silence of grief, the silence of a lie exposed to light. Richard's face had gone white. Ethan's perfect smile had vanished completely, replaced by something feral, desperate, the face of a young man who had been caught and didn't know how to perform his way out. Poole was already closing his briefcase, his professional composure cracking, his eyes flicking to the door. That, I said, is a felony. Conspiracy to commit fraud. attempted theft by deception, and I reached into my purse again, pulled out my phone. It's currently being uploaded to 3 different cloud servers, emailed to my sister, my lawyer, and the district attorney's office, with timestamps, with metadata, with everything needed to prove it's authentic. I looked at Richard. His gray-green eyes were wide, terrified, the eyes of a man who had finally understood that the ground had given way beneath his feet. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I am alone. I have been alone my whole life. That's why I learned to be careful. That's why I learned to watch, and wait, and record. That's why my first husband, the man you thought was just a successful businessman, spent the last year of his life teaching me how to protect myself from people exactly like you." I walked to the door. I opened it. The morning air was cool, clean, the air of a world that had just become simpler. "Richard," I said, "I want a divorce. Today. Poole can draw up the papers. I'm sure he has templates for everything. I want you out of this house by tonight. You and Ethan both." "Margaret," Richard's voice cracked. "Please, we can talk about this. I was scared. About money, about Ethan, about the future. I made a mistake. I let fear." "You let greed," I said. "There's a difference. Fear is human. Greed is a choice. And you chose, Richard. Every day we were together, you chose. The oranges in the grocery store. Did you plan that too? The grief group? The coffee?" He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. I turned to Ethan. He was still against the fireplace, but his shoulders had slumped, the posture of a young man who had finally run out of performances. "Ethan," I said, "I want you to know something. I did love you. Not as a son. We didn't have time for that. But as a person. I saw something in you. That first night. Something tired and real underneath the charm. I hoped. I really hoped. That I was wrong about you. That you were just a protective son who wanted his father to be happy. I wanted to be wrong." I picked up my purse. I put the recorder back inside. "But I wasn't wrong. And now you get to live with that. Both of you." I walked out. The black Lincoln was still in the driveway, and I walked past it, down the sidewalk, toward the street. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I was walking away from the lie, from the performance, from the careful architecture of a trap I had almost let myself fall into. "Margaret!" Richard's voice behind me, broken and desperate. "Margaret, please. I love you. I do. I know I lied. I know I planned. But somewhere in there, it became real. It became—" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "The worst thing you did," I said, "wasn't the plan. It wasn't the money, or the lawyer, or the guardianship. The worst thing you did was make me believe that kindness was real. That the man in the rain, crying over oranges, actually existed. You made me hope, Richard. And that's the one thing I can't forgive." I kept walking. The street was quiet, empty, the morning stillness of a town that didn't know what had just happened in one of its modest houses. I walked until I reached the corner, until Richard's voice faded, until the black Lincoln disappeared behind me. Then I stopped. I leaned against a telephone pole, and I let myself cry. Not for Richard, not for the marriage that had lasted 3 days, or the love that had never been real. I cried for myself, for the woman who had been so lonely that she had ignored every warning sign, who had wanted so badly to believe that kindness existed that she had let herself be hunted. But even as I cried, I felt something hardening inside me. The diamond, forming under pressure. The wall, rebuilding itself. Stronger this time. Smarter. I took out my phone. I called Diane. "Margaret." Her voice was sleepy, confused. "It's 7 in the morning. Is everything—" "I need you to come get me," I said. "And I need you to call Harold, David's lawyer. Tell him it's time to review the trust protections. Tell him I have evidence of attempted fraud by my new husband and his son. Tell him—" I paused, my voice steadying. Tell him David was right. About everything. Margaret, what happened? Where are you? I'm at the corner of Maple and 3rd in my wedding dress. Don't ask questions, Diane, just come. I hung up. I looked down at myself. Cream dress. Simple. Elegant. The dress that had said, I'm starting over. It was stained now. Wrinkled. Ruined. The dress of a woman who had learned that starting over didn't mean forgetting what came before. I waited. The sun rose higher. Cars passed, drivers glancing at the woman in the wedding dress standing by a telephone pole, and I didn't care what they thought. I had survived worse than curiosity. I had survived Daniel, and David's death, and Richard's lies. I would survive this. Diane's car pulled up 20 minutes later. She got out, took one look at me, and wrapped her arms around me without a word. She smelled like lavender and worry, the smell of my sister. The smell of the only person who had never lied to me. Get in, she said. We'll go to my place. We'll figure this out. I got in. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. The small, modest house where I had spent 3 days as a wife, 3 days as a target, 3 days as a fool. The black Lincoln was gone. Richard and Ethan were gone. The trap had been sprung, and I had walked out of it. But I knew with the certainty of someone who had learned this lesson before, that they wouldn't stop. Richard was desperate now, exposed, his careful plan in ruins. Ethan was young enough to be dangerous, old enough to be vindictive. They would fight. They would claim I was crazy, that I had manipulated them, that the recording was fake or coerced or taken out of context. And they would lose, because I had something they didn't have. I had the truth. And I had learned, finally, that the truth was a weapon sharper than any lie. The divorce was final in 6 weeks. Richard didn't fight it, couldn't fight it, not with the recording, not with the charges the district attorney was considering, not with the media attention that Diane had carefully cultivated. Local widow targeted by con artists in fake marriage scheme. The headlines were brutal, unforgiving, exactly what Richard and Ethan deserved. Ethan was expelled from his fancy prep school, the one Richard had been so proud of, the one that had cost so much. He tried to claim he was a minor, that he had been manipulated by his father, but the recording didn't lie. He had been an active participant. He had called me mom while planning to steal everything I had. Richard lost his accounting license, lost his clients, lost the small house on the edge of town, which was foreclosed when the legal bills mounted. Last I heard, he was working at a gas station 2 towns over, living in a studio apartment, alone. Ethan had gone to live with his mother's sister, somewhere in Ohio. I didn't know if they spoke anymore. The $53 million remained in the trust. Harold reviewed the protections, added new layers, made it even harder for anyone to access without my explicit, verified consent. I didn't need the money. I had never needed it, but I kept it, guarded it, the way David had taught me. Because money wasn't the point. The point was the lesson. The point was learning that the world was full of vultures, and that the only defense was to be smarter, harder, more patient than they were. I moved to a different town, bought a small house with cash, no mortgage, no records. I went back to the library part-time, just enough to have a reason to leave the house. I made new friends, slowly, carefully, always watching for the signs I had missed with Richard. The oranges, the careful kindness, the performance of grief. I never remarried. I never even dated. Diane pushed sometimes. Margaret, you can't let them win. You can't let them take love from you. But I just smiled and changed the subject. Love wasn't the point anymore. Survival was. And then, 2 years later, I met someone. Her name was Clara. She was 73, widowed, with hands that shook from Parkinson's and eyes that saw everything. She came to the library every Tuesday, checked out the same 3 mysteries, returned them the next week without having read them. You're the woman, she said, the 3rd Tuesday. Not a question. Excuse me? The one from the papers. The fake marriage. The 53 million. She smiled, a gap-toothed grin that made her look like a mischievous child. I read everything. I'm nosy. It's my only vice. I should have been alarmed. I should have walked away, changed libraries, disappeared again. But something in Clara's eyes, the frankness, the lack of performance, the simple human curiosity that asked for nothing, made me stay. Yes, I said. That was me. Stupid man, Clara said. Richard, was it? Stupid and greedy. The worst combination. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you were stupid too, weren't you? You wanted to believe. You wanted the oranges. I stared at her. No one had ever said that to me. Everyone else, Diane, the lawyers, the therapists, had focused on Richard's villainy, my victimhood, the injustice of it all. No one had pointed out the obvious, that I had let myself be fooled, because I had wanted to be fooled. Yes, I said. I wanted the oranges. Clara nodded, satisfied. Good. First step is admitting it. Second step is learning to want something else. She stood up slowly, her shaking hands finding the edge of the table. Same time next week? Same time, I said. She became my friend. Not a replacement for what I had lost. Nothing could replace that. But something new. Something real. We talked about books and gardening and the absurdity of growing old. We complained about the weather and the government and the price of oranges. She never asked me for money. She never performed grief or need or any of the other emotions that I had learned to distrust. She just was. Real, flawed, shaking, present. And slowly, painfully, I learned to be real too. The last time I saw Richard was 5 years later. I was in the city. Harold had called me in for a trust review, some new tax regulation that needed my signature and I stopped at a coffee shop on my way back to the train station. He was there, sitting at a corner table, alone, thinner than I remembered, his hair gone gray, his suit cheap and ill-fitting. He was staring at an orange, just one, on a small plate, part of some breakfast special. And he was crying, not performing, not calculating, just crying, the way he had in the grocery store, the way that had made me stop and offer comfort to a stranger. I should have walked away. I knew I should have walked away. But something, curiosity, closure, the last ghost of the woman I had been, made me approach. Richard, I said. He looked up. His gray-green eyes were faded now, washed out not by lake water but by time and failure and the long, slow erosion of hope. He didn't smile. He didn't perform. He just looked at me, and I saw recognition and shame and something that might have been regret. Margaret, he said. His voice was rough, unused, the voice of a man who didn't speak to many people anymore. I didn't expect— No one expects anything, I said. I sat down across from him, uninvited. That's the problem. We think we know what's coming, and then we don't. He looked at the orange. I can't eat these anymore. I buy them sometimes. Try to remember what it felt like. Before. When the smell meant something good. Now it just smells like rot. Like everything I ruined. You ruined it, I said. Not cruelly, just stating a fact. You chose greed over whatever we might have had. You and Ethan both. Ethan. Richard's face twisted. He won't speak to me. Blames me for everything. Says I ruined his life, his future, his— He laughed, a broken sound. His performance. That's what he calls it. His performance. He was so good at it, Margaret. Better than me. I think he believed it. Sometimes. That he really loved you. That we really were a family. Love isn't a performance, I said. It's a choice. Every day. You chose not to make it. He nodded. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The same gesture, unguarded and human, that had stopped me in the grocery store all those years ago. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry. For the oranges. For the lie. For making you believe in something that was never real. I looked at him. The faded eyes, the gray hair, the cheap suit, the orange he couldn't eat. The man who had almost destroyed me, who had taught me that kindness could be a weapon, that love could be a trap. And I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Not forgiveness. I would never forgive him. Not completely. Not the way Diane thought I should. But pity. For the man who had had everything and thrown it away because he couldn't see past the money. Richard, I said, I want you to know something. The money, the $53 million, it's still there. I haven't touched most of it. I don't need it. I never needed it. What I needed was someone to peel oranges with. Someone to sit on the porch and watch fireflies. Someone real. I stood up. I looked at him one last time. You could have been that person. You chose not to be. That's on you. Not me. Not the money. You. I walked out. The coffee shop door chimed behind me, and I stepped into the city noise, the traffic, the ordinary chaos of a world that kept turning whether I was ready or not. I didn't look back. I had learned that lesson too. I still have the recorder, the pen, disguised and innocent, sitting in my dresser drawer. I don't use it anymore. Clara would never give me reason, and I have learned to trust my own judgment again, slowly, carefully, the way you learn to walk after a long illness. But I keep it, as a reminder, as proof that I survived, that I was smart enough, patient enough, hard enough to outlast the vultures. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out. I hold it in my hand, feeling its weight, its potential. And I think about David, my first husband, the paranoid, the planner, the man who had seen the world clearly enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. He had known. He had always known that love made you vulnerable, that kindness could be exploited, that the world was full of people who saw grief as an opportunity. He had tried to teach me that, in his careful, obsessive way, and I had resisted, resented, pushed back against his paranoia until it was too late to thank him. But he had been right, and I had learned. And the recorder, his last gift, his final lesson, had saved me when nothing else could. I put it back in the drawer. I close the compartment. I go to bed, in my small house, in my quiet life, with my real friend and my real routines and my real, imperfect peace. And I sleep. Not always well. The dreams still come sometimes. Richard's gray-green eyes, Ethan's perfect smile, the sound of a lawyer's voice saying, "Concerns about your fitness." But I sleep. I wake. I live. Because that's the final lesson, the one that took me the longest to learn. The vultures don't stop circling. They never do. But you don't have to be prey. You can be the wall. You can be the diamond. You can be the woman who walks away, who survives, who builds something real out of the wreckage of everything that was fake. You can be Margaret Cole, widow, survivor, fool, and finally, free.